to the IT's Her Future podcast. If you wish to reach out to us, please do so through our email itsherfuture@kpmg.co.uk. I'm your host, Neve. This week we'll be discussing the topic of rebranding tech and some common myths around the tech sector. A bit of background about me is that I'm a graduate consultant in connected technology, and I've been with KPMG since October 2021, where I joined straight from university where I studied chemistry with forensic science. On this episode we have three guests, Kurt, Mar and Mabeen, who are all tech consultants within connected technology. Why don't we all go around briefly and say what our roles within the company are and how we got here. So Mar, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure, I'm a technical architect of Dynamics and Power Platform. I've been working with Microsoft solutions for almost 10 years, and I joined KPMG 1.5 years ago. So working with international team worldwide.
Thank you very much. Mabeen, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I joined KPMG around 3.5 years ago, but I joined with a finance background. I worked with an end user before that and as a member of an accounting team prior to that. So KPMG was my first step into the tech world.
And Kurt.
Hi, so I'm Kurt. I'm a customer engagement functional consultant within MBS. I only recently joined KPMG. 1st of March was my first day, so I'm very new to the dynamic space, the Power Platform space. Yeah, like maybe it's my first foray into technical consultancy.
So now that we've all gotten to know you, really briefly, I thought I'd discuss what's meant by rebranding tech and the episode that we're going to be doing. So as people who work closely with tech, we all know how diverse the industry is. But I know personally, when I tell people in other industries, they just think of big tech companies and coding in a dark room. So to just get the discussion started, I thought I'd ask you all, do you right now think there is a need to rebrand working in tech? And how do you think the image of tech has changed in the last couple years? So Mabeen, would you like to start?
I definitely think a rebrand is way overdue. When I tell people that I work in the tech space, the responses I get is, images of a factory where I'm putting together computers and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's definitely not what we do. But, if people are getting that as one of the first reactions when they hear working in tech, that clearly shows that we're way overdue a rebrand within the space.
Sure. And Kurt, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think tech's moved on so much over the last, even a year, 2 years, right? A lot of it is changing, and you don't actually need a lot of coding skills. People think of tech as you have to have done a degree in it, but actually a lot of the apprenticeships that we offer within the firm and things like that you don't need those experiences specifically. Like tech is just so overreaching, right? Everything we do involves tech. And so I think this image of I'm working in tech is such an umbrella term that I think it's too broad to define. And you're right, like I mean, everybody just focuses on your coding, whereas tech actually is so much. I'm sure we'll talk throughout the podcast as to what tech means, but I do think it does need a change because technology has changed, but we've not moved along with it, if that makes sense, in terms of how we define what tech is.
And Mar, what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, that's surprisingly because I'm a coder, I'm a developer, I'm coming from a really technical background, and I used to be this kind of a stereotype, like you have to sit down in your chair for 8 hours and you have to code all day long. And that's not what technology means. As Cart said, technology is everywhere. We are using technology for everything. And we have to change our mind that technology is only coding and working with hardware and software. So in technology, there are many things involved. There are marketing, there are human resources, there is innovation. And innovation is not only about technologies. I think startups made a really huge impact like 20 years ago because they show that people without any technology background, they could really make an impact to society. So I think that we have to start thinking more about what do we want to embrace as technology. It is more about constantly innovating, constantly changing the world how we used to be. And I think that's what technology should be, and that's why it's important to rebrand it.
That's a really interesting point of view, especially considering you are from a more technical side, so you do have that perspective. So I thought what I would do is I'd read 4 common myths around working with tech and we can discuss our views around them. So the first myth is that you need a computer science degree to work in tech. And if you remember from earlier, I have a background in chemistry with forensic science, which sometimes I introduce myself and people are like, wow, that's a bit different. But I think, if anything, it's just given me a different skill set. So I can see things from a different point of view to somebody who maybe did study computer science. So, Kurt, would you like to discuss this topic first?
Yeah, I am epitome of not being in tech. I am not a coder. I don't do any of that stuff. And I was in the Air Force actually for a couple of years. I was an air traffic controller. And actually, that skill set has made me very good in the tech that's not tech, if that makes sense. So major incident management is something I did with my previous employer before I joined KPMG. So major incident management is a huge part of the tech support. So if your apps go down, for example, a database has gone down, or a contact center suddenly lost all internet, who deals with it? Because you need people that are major incident managers. So although I wasn't a technical person, I was the person that people came to when something broke, because I had a calm head. I was the person that said, right, everybody, calm down. Your software will still be there, everything backed up, don't worry. So I guess that side for me was like, yeah, you don't need a computer science degree to work within tech. Like I said, we need to change the definition of what you define as tech. I saw my job as a very technical job. Although I wasn't the one coding, I had to have an awareness of what people were doing so that if something went wrong, I could deal with that. And when I tell people in my previous, I was a major incident manager, everyone's like, oh, we didn't realize that job existed. People forget that there are a back office support team that deals with HR and finance and things like that. People see tech as like, oh, you're a coder, you're the person that fixes everything, but they don't. There is a whole host of back office support and also the front office teams that get business through the door for the software developers. So yeah, I don't think you do need a computer science degree to work in tech. I guess it depends what sort of tech you want to go into. I had a huge interest in when things break and how I can help people fix things. And I guess that's my role as a functional consultant as well. I'm looking at problems all the time. My job at foremost is a problem solver, not a technical person. Like, I solve problems. It doesn't matter if it's a technical problem or an incident or a major breakdown of tech. As a person, as my role, I see myself as a problem solver, not someone that works in tech. Tech just happens to be there.
I think that was a really great point, especially considering you brought up the roles such as finance and HR. And I agree, I think problem solving is a really great way to think of it, because I think through my chemistry background, I've got a load of problem solving skills, because that was a lot of what my lab work was, and was all to do with teamwork. So it really is the skills you can bring from your background. So Ma, I know you do have a computer science background, so would you like to discuss it from the other side of that argument?
Absolutely. If I remember when I was younger, for sure, my mind about you must study something related with technology if you want to work in technology. But it was like 15 years ago. It was something because the people told you if you want to develop, if you want to be a software engineer, you have to study software engineering. But then I realized that coding, for example, it's not only for people that has studied computer engineering. There are plenty of people that really have this problem solving mind, this logical mind, this kind of organized mind, that they are really good in coding. For example, I do a mentorship for young women that they want to change their career path and they try to learn front end development. And I realize how people with different skills coming from different backgrounds, they can really put their own change, their own mind in coding and make the difference. And I think that's the important topic here. It doesn't matter if you don't come from a technology background, because if you are coming from a different background, you are also giving something different to the perspective, to the end product, because your mind is different, your approach is different, you have a different perspective. And I think that makes the huge difference. I learned during these years that most of the best consultants I have ever met, they weren't IT people or computer engineers. They were people really committed with the customer. They were people really enthusiastic with their job, with a really innovative mind. So they really want to apply the digital change. So I think that's the most important thing. If you're not coming from a tech background, there is always time to learn. So there is always time to start. There are plenty of YouTube videos, there are plenty of tutorials. So you don't need to spend 4 years at the university. Just put yourself in it and I'm sure that you will find your path. The only thing you need to pursue is what you really want. And if you really want to work in tech, there are plenty of opportunities and plenty of perspectives that you can work with.
So just to wrap up on that myth, Mabine, what do you believe about needing a computer science degree to be in tech?
It's definitely a myth. So in A levels, I actually studied chemistry, biology, and mathematics. So nothing to
Same.
do with tech at all. Exactly. So I slowly learned that chemistry wasn't my forte. I wanted to go into the world of pharmacy, and I didn't really have an analytical brain. I had more of a problem-solving brain, like Kurt mentioned. So I then went into the world of accounting. So I kind of was a bit of a default position because I really wanted to do something in the science field. And again, nothing to do with the technology space. So at university, I studied accounting and finance, and I enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. And after leaving university, I went and pursued a master's in accounting, which is basically the ACCA version of it, and worked in the accounting department. And my role there as management accountant was literally looking at the operational side of a business, working out what we spend our materials on, and again leading to back to the point of a very problem solving in terms of my thought processes, in terms of my day-to-day work. So financial reporting for the business, for the stakeholders, for the shareholders, it was very reportable information that I was working with, and I really, really enjoyed that. And then we went on a internal tech transformation, and I got involved in that, and I loved working with the business in terms of understanding what we currently did and what we're planning on doing in the future, and if we could actually get there. And then that whole problem solving bit around it, around how can we get from A to B in a more efficient way. And because I absolutely loved that, I then came into the world of consulting within IT. And IT is something that I've always loved, but I never really studied it in any way. But the consulting element of IT and then the finance skill set that I had with my education piece came together really well. And that's how I landed my role within KPMG as a functional consultant within the finance space. So I kind of picked and chose my strengths along my journey, and it all came together in this current role. So if anything, we know, hearing all of our three experiences in our career path so far, it completely debunks the idea that you need computer science. And touching on Mars' point earlier, was some of the best consultants that I've worked with have never actually done anything with computer science, and it's the skill set that they've gained through their careers.
Yeah, I think, as we were saying earlier, tech is so broad that you can find a role for you within tech with your backgrounds. And a lot of us have mentioned that we like problem solving. I think that was one of the key things that does link us all, despite all of our different backgrounds. And it really leads on to the second myth that I was going to discuss, which is that tech has to involve coding. So I know personally I've never needed it for my role. And as we've discussed previously here, a lot of us haven't really needed it. So how do you feel, just sort of as an overview from what you know from the company and your roles, about that myth, just in a bit more depth than we might have touched on with the previous question? Ma, would you like to start just from a more technical side?
As we mentioned before, going more in depth, for sure, if you're trying to be an architect, if you're trying to be a developer, if you really want to put your hands on the final product, somehow you need coding skills. That's for sure. But these are for really techie roles. So if you really want to be a developer, do you want to be a technical designer? If you really want to be a database administrator, for sure you need some technical skills, because that's at the end knowledge. So it's not about technical, it's more about knowledge. You need to know what you're doing. So yeah, to stay myself a bit different from Kurt and Movin, I think that yeah, for really technical roles, you really need technical skills. You really need coding. You have to fight against Python, C Sharp, and anything else. But if we talk about what is the process to have, so how a project becomes a real application, so how something that starts from an idea becomes something tangible, it involves more than coding. It involves marketing, it involves design, it involves managing, it involves project management, it involves resource management, it involves finance. So it involves a lot of things. And for sure, you don't need code on those kind of roles.
That was a really good perspective. Thank you. Kurt, would you like to go next?
I don't know how I can go after that. That's everything I wanted to say. But you're right, yeah. That, like I said, tech is so broad. I think it's hard to say tech has to involve coding because, like Mara saying, I've got nothing more to add to that. If you want to become a developer, you want to become a software developer, you're going to have to code. But I guess for other roles, I mean, for myself, like I'm a functional consultant. Like Mal said, I do have to have an awareness of code, but I don't necessarily need to know how to code, let's say JavaScript or CSS or HTML. I personally feel as long as I know who is the best at coding, I've done my job because I point into the right direction. You'll see in consultancy, like a lot of it is just saying, oh, I don't know the answer. Someone else will know the answer. Someone else will know the answer. Someone else will know the answer. But being able to do that, as long as you know who can code, you're fine. That's how I see it.
Sure. And Mabeen, was there anything you would like to add onto this?
Yes, I guess two great answers there, and you're 100% right. You don't need to know everything. It's about the network that you build around you and the people that you know that will help you do your role and get the business and the clients to where they want to get to. And I think the biggest thing about that is it's always nice to add an extra string to your bow. So if you have some free time, you want to learn something new, go and try coding, give it a go. It's always, an extra skill that'll put you ahead of someone else somewhere or give you a better position in your role of understanding a certain situation that you might be in. So no one's saying that you need coding to get to certain places in your role. It's always nice to have an extra skill under your belt for you to then take on in your role and going forward. So it's not a must, but it could be a good nice to have.
It's not an entry requirement, but you can build the skill once you're in. And I think through mentioning it's the people you know and building a network, it really leads on to the next myth that some people believe, that tech has minimal human interaction and there's no development for soft skills. And I think we've touched on it a little bit. And Maveen, would you like to start? As you did mention, it's about building a network.
Exactly. So it's all about human interaction, and it's the soft skills get you a long, long way. So, you have people that are introvert, you have extroverts, and I work with two different types of people, and no matter which one you are, you always will end up with a lot of human interaction, whether that's within your colleague team, your peers, your clients. Human interaction is ongoing, whether that's from working from home, and that's what the tech industry is actually showing the rest of the world over the last couple of years. And even by working from home, you don't lose that human interaction element. And then within all of that, your soft skills encompassed within that, right? So your communication skills, your problem solving that we've touched on as well. So in terms of it being very minimal, a consultant's role thrives off human interaction. So being able to understand where your clients are, what they need, and where they're trying to get to, and then your soft skills and being able to get that information out of your clients and being able to work that working relationship and building the future with them as opposed to for them. And that's a big thing within our role, is working with your clients as opposed to you working for your clients. And even within your peer group, your business like this, but what we're doing right now, we're using our soft skills to share our experience and our knowledge.
Yeah, there are a lot of soft skills that go into it, as well as just being able to communicate with clients, with your peers. There's also being able to present. I know I've been in a lot of meetings and presentations as well, and there is more human interaction than you'd think from like a stereotypical point of view. So Marv, what do you think about the soft skills side of working in tech?
I mean, I completely agree with Movin. You are completely lost if you think that you can work completely alone. I mean, that's about being a team, and you are a piece of a team, so you need them. Not because they are going to be part of the end project or the end application, is because at the end you will need the perspective of a financial person. You will need someone who schedule your resources. You will need someone who gives you the perspective of the customer. And of course, you will need to speak with the customer. So at the end, if we think about the old typical applications, they were really a disaster because developers used to work alone. And that's something that happened 30 years ago. But for sure, and luckily, it has changed a lot because we have learned that that's about team building. That's about being an important piece, and you are doing the code, but there are someone else who is doing another part of the end project. And that's the important thing. What you are delivering is not only an application, it's you are delivering an experience to the customer, you are delivering a consultancy, you are delivering at the end something successful, something that it's a problem solver to their original problem. So you need all of the people that might help you and might be helpful for the output of this original problem. And the second thing about soft skills If you are not able to communicate, if you are not able to express yourself, it is really difficult, one, to be part of this team, because at any point you need to be able to communicate your problems, to ask what do you need, and also to understand what your colleagues are trying to transmit you. And that's important, because if you don't understand what the customer needs, at the end what you are doing is something completely different as the initial requirements. And that's something that the technical profiles we learned some time ago. We need someone who builds up this bridge and who help us to link these two ways communication. But that's something that ourselves we need to work on it. And that's a really hard soft skill, I will say, because for many technical people, they really think that they don't need those skills, and indeed you need them. So you need to communicate not only to the customer but also to your colleagues. And also because being part of a team is also helping others. So you are not going to know always the answer. That's something that Cart said, but you will know who knows the answer, and you will need to be able to ask. You will need to be able to answer. You will need to be able to always be there for someone. And that's really hard at the beginning when you are joining a company. But building this community and building this interaction, it's really important to improving yourself, to keeping your career growing.
So the next question is more for Mabine and Mar, because the next myth is around that tech is only for men. And I think with IT's her future and women in tech and all the resources, I think we're proving that that's not quite true. So Mar, would you like to discuss this myth first?
That's absolutely not true. I mean, from the very beginning, and I'm not talking 30 years ago, I'm talking even older, women were always there. Mathematics, engineers were always there. The problem was that the focus were not on us. That was the problem. So we were always in the shadows. And for many years, people thought that these kind of jobs were not for us. And that's not true. We were always there. And luckily, we were not the important ones. So that's the topic here. It's not about your gender. It's not even your origin, where you're coming from, where your nationality it is. It's about yourself.
Mm.
So don't let the stereotypes tell you what you can do or what you cannot do. That's really hard, because for young women and for girls, they really need someone references to follow. Because if they see that all the people working in engineering, and I'm not only talking in software and coding, I'm also talking in mechanics, electronical, if they
Mm.
don't see feminine references, they don't think that they can do it as well. And that's so hard to achieve, I know. And that's why we have so many initiatives here in KPMG. I have also Women in Tech initiatives. We try to empower women to participate in technical conferences. We empower them trying to achieve those skills that they need to present technical topics. We really want to show them that it's not about gender. Gender makes not a difference. It doesn't define yourself. It doesn't tell you, hey, because you are a woman, you cannot achieve that. That's completely a myth for sure. And also, something really hard is that still at the universities, still in any, and I'm more going into a deep technical role. In the technical background, there is still a lot of lack to have more technical, and I'm talking about really technical roles in companies. It's good to show and to prove that technical, that the tech world, it's not about coding. That's perfect. And that's for sure. We want to prove, as we discussed, that technical involves more than coding. But if I take a look to my specific role, if I take a look to the more technical skills, there is a lack. There is a really, really big lack. And it scares me a little bit, because we are in the 21st century and it's really, really hard to see that women still don't think and don't choose development, computer and science as a first choice. How we can do and how we can change that, it's really good what we are doing right now. So to prove that technology is for everyone, for any career, for any skill, for any gender, for anyone. And also to prove that women doing big things in technology. They are CEOs, they are CTOs, and we for sure need more.
Yeah, it's really putting a spotlight on the role models that do exist and encouraging more. I think this is why the podcast is so important. We're going to discuss further topics in other weeks to do with subject divides and promotion, and it is important to have the discussion and educate people on this. So how are you feeling about that myth that tech is only for men, Mabeen?
Definitely disagree. I think that's a bit of a no-brainer. But I think what's interesting, and I've always found interesting, is where we actually lose women along the journey. So if you look at statistics around year 9 SATs, girls tend to outperform the boys in that gender group. And when you look at the split, and in science, technology, or mathematics, girls within those groups are actually scoring higher than the boys in there in comparison. Then if you have a look at GCSE grades, girls come in at a couple of percentages higher than the boys in terms of passes and how many are actually getting the A stars and the A's. And then we get into the world of degrees where we have a significant drop in women that choose to actually go into our technology roles. So is that where we're missing the point? Is that where we're missing the communication to the females out there around, you know what, you've actually done really well in GCSEs and A levels and all of that kind of stuff. You've outperformed the boys, but the boys tend to choose those subjects more than the girls do. So there's a clear point in time during their career path, and that's that window that I think we need to take on head on a bit more, around after A levels, choosing your graduate degree roles. And it doesn't even have to be around the fact that they're choosing the university courses that we're trying to go towards. It, people can choose apprenticeships, people can use school leaver programs. So it's a case of, are we communicating to the girls at that level enough to empower them, to make them understand that these careers are actually not just for the boys within their groups, and they're actually able to do just as well or even better than the boys around them. It's like we can do everything a man can do, but we're not choosing to do the technology roles. There must be a reason behind it. And I think it's a big thing around communication, and that needs to come from leadership within the tech space, women and men. It's responsibility for both teams, and whatever gender you classify as, irrelevant of that, the communication needs to come from that leadership aspect down to the people that are choosing to make those career choices. And like we're doing right now, we're giving back to the community. This needs to be done a lot more regularly. This needs to be done by more people within different businesses. And yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing that we can do to combat that. But absolutely, I completely disagree around the fact that technology is just for men.
Yeah, I'd have to agree what you were saying about there being that lack of advertisement about what you can do between A levels and university. Personally, I sort of had it easier because I always knew I wanted to do chemistry at university, but I had some friends that were unsure, and I guess they just didn't know what resources were available to them to help them make an informed decision on what they could or couldn't do. So, Kurt, how do you feel about the perspectives that have been brought up? How have you found in your career the divide between men and women in the workplace and the amount of women on the teams you're working with?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I put my hand up and say, yeah, there's definitely an issue within tech. And I think the first thing as allies, I would say, we see it in the sporting world as well. I play rugby as well, and women rugby at the moment is having a tremendous upshift just because they're getting more funding. Like Mabeen said, they need more resources from a younger age. And then what you do create, it's an investment rather than a short-term solution. It's almost you're investing on young girls that might not think IT is for them, and you're saying it is for you. It's not just a boys' world anymore. Like times have changed, but then you won't see the results until 10, 20 years later, but you need to start now. And then you get people, you know, like Mara, Mabeen, and yourself who come through the system, and then you're now encouraging other people to join. But the way you got here is very different. I guess we're all motivated differently, right? But at 16, 17, I mean, I've worked in schools before. I've done volunteer days going to school. And when I do work with young people in a classroom and I say, right, let's go through, let's create a wireframe for an app, for example, the girls outperform the boys every time. They come up with the most creative solutions. The boys just like, yeah, just press this button and we'll go to the end. Whereas the girls will give you a list of requirements. They'll design it so amazingly. But because the boys, when they do presentation, they're a lot louder, and it does intimidate. And we're working with at schools having segregated classes and stuff where girls are more likely to ask questions in the class when it's just girls only in the classroom, because boys just disruptive at that age, you know. And I think there is also a thing with girls feeling they don't want to appear smarter than boys, because at that age you're kind of like a bit shy. Standing out is seen as a bad thing. And that was certainly in my case. You know, you don't want to stand out. You don't want to be top of the class, because we don't reward people that are top of the class. You sort of bully them because you're like, all right, teacher's pet. And I think there's a lot of stigma around that. And so I think for that reason, a lot of girls naturally don't want to stand out, and they don't want to be the smartest in the class, and they don't want to be like, I want to go into IT, I want to be better than the boys. I mean, you're telling me that they are, but they, in their minds at the age, they're so impressionable because they're like, no, I'm meant to feel like the boys are louder, the boys are better at stuff like that. I think male allyship is equally as important. Like me being on this podcast is like, oh, sometimes I'm feeling like, why am I here? I'm not a woman. Why am I trying to get more women in tech? But actually, the male voices in some situations is louder than women's. And I think the conversation is, how can men shout louder for women? I think that is a bigger question than men should do. I think men, there's definitely more that we can do. And you're right, that's like leadership. It has to come from leadership. Sponsoring this podcast, for example, or giving opportunities to not put barriers in front of women coming into IT. I think that's so important. And a lot of the time, because of the numbers that we are men in tech, that those decisions are made by men, and it's frustrating sometimes when they make the wrong decisions and they don't give us as much funding, for example, and stuff like that. And I'm fully aware of it. I think as a male ally, I think if there's any male listening to this, I'm sure there will be, it's just stand up and shout louder. But as a man, standing back and doing nothing is worse than keeping silent. And that's the reason when Neve was like, oh, can you do this podcast? Like, absolutely. Like, I will shout as loud as I can for tech. And I think that's equally as important as also providing opportunities for women.
I think that comment about allyship is important, because we can shout as loud as we want, but if there aren't enough women at the top, how far can this podcast reach? And your discussion about boys at school compared to girls at school. So I went to an all-girls school, so I never really noticed it. And then I went to sixth form and it was mixed, and it was a bit of a shock to me, because I was like, they are louder. And I guess it was a sort of a little bit of a privilege to not have to experience that in my younger years. So I was able to build that confidence that I wasn't as shaken by it when I then had to experience then sort of competing with the males in my class. Leading on from those myths and the current topics we've been discussing about educating girls from a younger age and just women in general. So if somebody was listening who may have apprehensions about joining a tech company or perhaps studying tech or anything like that, what advice would you give them? Because I know before I started the job, my experience with tech was extremely limited, so I wasn't sure how sort of valuable I would be. But as I've been here and discussed things with people and gotten to know more people, I realized that there are such diverse backgrounds, and that in fact there is a place for me within the company and I am valuable in my own sense. What one piece of advice would you give to a young girl or a young woman, or just maybe anyone considering a career change to tech? So Mabeen, would you like to start?
Sure. I guess the advice is, don't put a blocker before a blocker is even there. It's a case of, you know what, it's, you can do it. If you want to go into the tech space, you have a skill set behind you, and those skill sets are the soft skills. And no one's going to sit there and say, have you done a coding course, or have you done an X or a Y qualification? It's not about the qualifications at this point. So if you want to make the transition into an IT space, look at building your soft skills within yourself, communication, problem solving, and it's a case of understand what are your strengths and trying to communicate your strengths across, because it's your strengths that are going to help you within the role that you end up in. And if it's within the IT space, don't feel like because it's within the IT space it's an issue. In any job that you go into, learn as much as you can, be prepared for the role that's in front of you, and you'll learn as you go along. And that's how careers are built. I mean, CEOs of businesses aren't ready for those roles as soon as they come out of university. They've taken years to get there. And people within the senior leadership teams, and then as you work down that senior triangle itself, it people have got there because they've put themselves out there and they've learned, they've built on themselves, they've taken a challenge. And the biggest thing is within yourselves, and Kurt touched on this earlier, is the whole imposter syndrome. Is you're definitely able to do it. Learn as much as you can about the topic that you want to go into. The fact that you don't know 100%, no one out there knows 100% about anything, so you're not the only one. Be confident in yourself, believe that you can do it, and you know what, things will fall into place for you, because you'll have that drive, you'll have that determination. Because I mean, you're doing things like listening to this podcast, you're already halfway there and working on yourself. So if you're along that route already, you're in a winning situation. So bring all those things together, keep going, basically stay confident and positive, and you'll get there. So definitely don't worry about going into this tech space. This is massive. There's always room for you. You've got the skill set. You'll find something that you'll enjoy with the strengths that you have. So yeah.
That was some really great advice. I know a younger me would have loved to have heard that.
Oh, thank you.
Kurt, what about you? What's your one piece of advice?
As someone who very recently got into tech, I would say don't believe everything you read on the internet, because I think before you go for interviews, like you do go through the internet saying, what do I need to work in tech? And we've been saying you personally put blockers in your head because you create this image of what tech is based on what you read on the internet. And we keep saying this to people, don't believe everything you see on social media. It's the same with internet and tech. So based on that, I think my biggest advice, if I had to do it all again, is to speak to someone. There is always someone connected somehow. Someone in your personal life right now, whether it's through your parents, whether it's your teacher, your guidance counselor, someone will know someone that is currently working in tech or someone that you want to become. So, for example, I left the military and spoke to someone called Mike. He came off the military and is now a solutions architect and pre-sales and things like that. And speaking to him for half an hour was so much better than spending a month looking through the internet as to what a functional consultant is, because he told me what his job was and I did feel as bad. I'm like, all right, actually, I've got all the strengths that I knew I had. I'm a problem solver. So basically, I had 30 minutes with someone who was actually doing a job that I wanted to do. And that is so much more powerful than trying to figure out yourself. And so, yeah, I would just speak to someone that knows someone, get connected to a job that you want to do and build those connections early and speak to someone in tech as soon as you can, if you're considering it, rather than worry yourself about what you read on the internet.
Yeah, I think that's really a who you know, not what you know situation.
Absolutely.
I know I've had people message me on LinkedIn to ask for advice, and I'm more than happy to message because I know how scary it can be from the outset, but talking to a real human about it, you just sort of get the more stripped down version. And Ma, what would your one piece of advice be?
My advice to my mentorship students are challenge yourself. And when I'm saying challenge yourself, it's not putting limits to yourself, so break them. So don't tell to yourself, I can't do it, as Movin said. Do it. Tell it, I'm going to do it. I don't know how. I'm going to search it. I'm going to find someone who's going to help me, but I'm going to do it. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to recognize that you don't know something. Even people in tech who've been working for long years, we have to search how to solve things in internet. So no one knows the answer always. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask to someone, hey, I need someone who can help me. So challenge yourself. Try every day to learn something new. That's for sure. Like right now, we are learning from each other. So ask yourself every night what I have learned today and what I can learn tomorrow. So try to be the best of yourself. Try to achieve your challenges and try to put some realistic goals. For example, I really want to learn how to read statistical graphics because I have no clue how they work. So just put some goals on your track. So try to set realistic expectations about what do you want to achieve, and don't take a look to your back. You're going to be always the best of yourself every day, so don't take a look to the back. Just move on straight on and pursue your dreams.
I think those were some really great pieces of advice for our listeners, and I hope they take away some key messages from this episode. I also hope we've helped debunk some myths and help take some steps in the very much needed rebrand of tech by showing truly how broad it is and how much a rebrand might be needed. It was so good to talk to you all today, and I'd really like to thank you for being the first guest on our podcast and for having such an amazing discussion. If you think a career in tech or with KPMG is for you, please go to our website at www.kpmgcareers.co.uk. Or if you want to reach out to IT's Her Future to ask any questions, or if you have any topics you think we should discuss on further podcast episodes, the email is itsherfuture@kpmg.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening.